Hi, my name's Mark. I'm one of the pastors here at Trillium. You probably heard the news that Don Cherry was fired from Hockey Night in Canada. I remember him back in the 80s, when he was just a young man, hearing him doing commentary on Hockey Night in Canada on a Saturday night. And he's had quite an interesting career. He's a hockey commentator. He's also a provocateur, right? He was hired for that reason. That's why he was paid like $1 million a year to do the segment. I'm amazed at the speed of our culture, though. I'm always struck by how fast things turn. Here's a guy who's had a 34-year career, I think it is, and it turns within a couple of days and he's out of the job. It reminds me also that we live in a culture or a time of outrage. Everybody seems to experience and find a moment of outrage. We're all, in a sense, feeling the insult. And it goes back and forth. And I think the story of Don Cherry is quite illustrative of the kind of culture we live in today. We see the outrage, actually, it begins before Don Cherry ever gets into the broadcast booth. He's going about in his daily life, noticing in Mississauga where he lives and in downtown Toronto that there's a real dearth of people wearing poppies. And he's really dismayed by this. He sees this as something important that's being lost. He almost sees this as an insult to veterans and their importance in our life. And he goes on the broadcast and he immediately launches into an outrage against the people who are not wearing the poppies. That famous "you people," you outsiders, you newcomers who don't hold on to the ways that true Canadians would. That insult goes out through the waves and people experience it as an outrage. And of course they respond in kind. And they engage in outrage against Don Cherry by calling up Rogers, Sportsnet, CBC with a torrent of complaint. And then a few days later, there's the counter outrage, people who like Don Cherry or agree with what he's saying, and they have their own outrage back. And we see outrage going back and forth. Spiritually speaking, what we're seeing is attack thoughts going back and forth, back and forth. And in the end, all we do is see a culture even more polarized and upset than it was before. Jesus talks in one part of the Gospels about having to turn the other cheek. Or when someone's grabbing on to your cloak just to give it over to them. And if someone asks you to walk a mile with them, to offer to go a second mile with them. And what he's talking about is that in those situations where people are commanding something from you, for instance, they are attempting to compel you to do something you don't want to do or force you to do something you don't want to do, or they're grabbing at your stuff that you love and hold dearly to, or they're making insults against you. In those moments, the proper way to respond is not with attack. It's not to insult back or slap the face back again. It's not to dig our heels in and hold on to our stuff as hard as we can. It's not when someone compels you to do something to dig your heels in and become even more resistant to what they're asking you to do. He says, no, we always return attack with love. And I think the reason for it is pretty simple. Jesus understands that underneath every attack, there really is a cry for love or a cry for help. In Don Cherry's case, I really hear his attack against people is really a cry for help. He sees something that's really important. He sees a tradition and a practice that he thinks is very important, a remembrance of veterans who have kind of created the culture and the world we find in Canada, the country that we love. He sees that whole tradition is disappearing, being displaced. His attack against people is really a cry to people to join him in remembering people who have gone before us, whose shoulders we stand on today. Now, he didn't make it so easy for us to hear. I agree with that. In his attack, he made it more likely that we're going to respond back with our own attack. But as Jesus says, the attack is always an invitation not to return kind for kind, but instead to return closed fists with open ones.